In the extended Republic of the United States, and among the great variety of interests, parties, and sects which it embraces, a coalition of a majority of the whole society could seldom take place on any other principles than those of justice and the general good, whilst there being thus less danger to a minor from the will of a major party, there must be less pretext also to provide for the security of the former by introducing into the government a will not dependent on the latter, or, in other words, a will independent of the society itself. It is no less certain than it is important, notwithstanding the contrary opinions which have been entertained, that the larger the society, provided it lie within a practicable sphere, the more duty capable it will be of self-government. And happily for the Republican cause, the practicable sphere may be carried to a very great extent by a judicious modification and mixture of the federal principle. Good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen. James Madison at your service. I'm pleased upon this balmy afternoon to have this brief discourse with you. And moreover, I find myself privileged in this year of 1779 to address you not as a public servant, but instead as a common citizen. Having enjoyed these last 3 years of retirement to enjoy the various provincial and pastoral pleasures that come from the life upon my family's farm, as well as the company of my amiable wife, I am pleased in this briefest instance to reflect upon the spirit of government and this curious path that we have walked for the better part of these last 20 years. For nearly a decade, we have embarked upon a singular experiment, having invented a system of government that has no parallel upon this theater of the globe. I speak, of course, of our federal system of government, our general constitution, which was ratified 11 years ago in 1788. Now, I know full well it is apparent to all the delicate situation America is faced in. For the past 4 years, we have found ourselves affixed with an administration in the form of our President of these United States that every day challenges those ideas of 1776. We have been fixed with a president who every day has restricted the laws for the naturalization of foreigners, a president who every day has endeavored to stymie the freedom of the press, the greatest bulwark to a free society, a president who every day in his candor has proven himself as obnoxious as he is fixed and set upon the ideals of monarchy contrary to the republican scriptures that have been placed forward. I speak, of course, of our current president, Mr. John Adams. So from that, I am pleased, knowing full well that soon we should find again the crucible of our democracy exercised, to find a revolution without blood, to share upon the various reflections of this system of government. The principles that this government was founded upon, the principles that I espoused in my youth and have carried every day since our nation's inception. And I will say calmly that from the first moments I was capable of contemplating political ideas, I have never ceased wishing success to a well-regulated Republican system of government. The success of such in America has been my utmost desire. It is this that has compelled me to study history, to labor every day for those public rights and private privileges that every citizen of these United States should hold as dear as any other citizen across the globe. There are some who have called me the father of the Constitution. I find no great value in that idea. Government is not like the fabled goddess of wisdom, the work of one mind. It takes many hands and as well as many heads. So it is my sanguine hope that over the course of this discourse, we may together with many heads and many hands find a more common, dare I even say more perfect, understanding of these spirits and scruples that every day compel America to improve itself. With that, friends, I invite a dear friend of mine, Mr. Smith, to serve as your representative, to ask your questions, and from that to continue to explore in our unabated curiosity this wondrous American experiment we hold so dear. Good day to you, Mr. Smith.
Good day, James. How are you faring?
Somewhat sickly, but every week is constant in that expectation.
Well, we shall hope that as this country perfects, you too shall perfect your person.
You are a flatterer, sir. That is my sanguine hope.
Speaking of perfection, we have a question from Tanisha, and, well, it's less of a question and more of a statement, and we hold certain truths in this country as self-evident and dear to our hearts, and one of these is the idea of ever perfecting this union. Tanisha states that we should end slavery. What are your comments on that statement at large, or how it pertains to the Constitution?
It is a very bold statement. I thank you, Miss Tanisha, for your candor upon it. You are correct. There are various truths that are self-evident. We can well recall the initial drafts that Mr. Jefferson put forward, saying that these rights and liberties were sacred and undeniable. So from that, when we speak to the institution of slavery, we find a masterpiece of circumlocution. What I mean by this is every day we put forward a desire to end the institution of slavery, but continue the interest of lining man's pockets based upon that institution. And let us examine, Miss Tanisha, our federal Constitution, which has no mention of the word slave, yet through 3 separate clauses supports and forwards the institution. I speak, of course, of the various bill which forbids any law to be made about the importation of enslaved peoples until, well, 20 years after the Constitution was ratified. We find the Fugitive Slave Act. We find in every instance that various representation is dependent upon 3/5 of all other persons, meaning that the southern faction of men will ever have more representatives, all because of men who are deemed property. Now, I will agree with you. I have endeavored to distance myself from the institution of slavery as well as I possibly could over the course of my life. And yet I will still say that under my family's name, some 100 people are enslaved. So how do we move forward in the course of this? It cannot be men of government so long as some view enslaved people as property. If property is a right in government, until that sentiment is changed, well, no agent of government will ever find any safety or any success in robbing men of what they deem to be property. It's why the people of the United States, in every instance, need to be enlightened. In the course of that, we must change public opinion. The greater question I hold, Miss Tanisha, is this: what is the more difficult thing to do? Ending the institution of slavery, or in every instance, changing the baneful racial prejudice which justifies the former of the institution? It is my great fear that we will end the institution of slavery and the racial prejudice will only continue in some separate form. It is only my hope, at the very least, that our posterity should be more enlightened than the present age in which we live in, and that man might change their minds. I thank you for that very bold and very brave question.
Mr. Madison, you spoke for a brief moment on men in seats of power and voting on behalf of their self-interest. And is there a way then to ensure that men in power vote not for their self-interest but rather for the interest of the people at large, i.e. Abolishing slavery or finding ways out of institutionalized racism?
A very good question, Mr. Smith. I must wonder, are you asking that upon behalf of someone else, or is it simply your own curiosity?
Oh, it was just my curiosity, James.
Oh, very good. I thank you for it. No. No. In truth, men of government seek their appointments for 3 reasons, ladies and gentlemen. We might hope that enlightened statesmen may always be at the helm, but, well, history has shown that yesterday's Solons, Dracos, Timons will be replaced with Caligulas or Cromwells. Agents of government seek their appointment for 3 reasons: ambition, agenda, and public good. Public good often being the least frequented of those self-same ideas. So how do we do so? Now, in truth, I spoke somewhat pessimistically, Mr. Smith, but there is a mechanism in which we can check those various agendas. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's examine our federal Constitution, which is crafted in such a way that ambition can be made to check ambition. Make no mistake, that is the whole purpose of our artificial faction system. Political parties exist for the sole reason of checking one another, to ensure they do not overleap the greater barrier, which are the rights of the citizenry of the United States. So when we speak of our system of checks and balances, it ensures that that power, which is necessary in systems of government, does not inevitably corrupt to such extreme that those magistrates and servants of the people forget from whence they came. From that, equally, there is a secondary boon to ensure that that power does not corrupt. The most sacred and undeniable of the various duties a citizen can hold, which is to not only write their representatives, keep in correspondence with them, but in every instance simultaneously to ensure that if those representatives are not upholding the various contracts put forward, that upon election day, be it every 2 years, 4 years, or 6 years, that the freeholders of every county ensure that they remember. Your vote is the most precious thing you can hold as a private citizen, to ensure the system of government remains firmly in your hands and not in someone else's. I will, Mr. Smith, in closing, put forward the words that Dr. Benjamin Franklin put forward at the Constitutional Convention. And when we stepped out of Freedom Hall, the people asked Dr. Franklin what we had given them. Dr. Franklin said, "A republic, if you can keep it." That is the nature of such systems, such democratic experiments, and this system that we have been laboring to build.
Thank you, sir, for that erudite answer.
You're very welcome.
We have another question from Tanisha, and this is about women and women's rights, specifically women's right to vote. The Constitution, she says, does not grant women the right to vote. Why are they not represented in this time, and how do you feel about women having access to that right?
A very good question, Ms. Tanisha. Thank you again for your second question. You'll find within the Constitution, its various caveats and clauses, there is no law pertaining to suffrage, meaning the enfranchisement of a people. Because at this present moment, for every subsequent state, each suffrage law is different. It's why in every instance we have our electoral college present. Knowing full well the suffrage or enfranchisement laws are different in every subsequent state, we need to have some uniform method by some of our agents being elected. It might surprise you to know, Ms. Tanisha, that, well, for a period of time after 1776, it was legal. There was, well, no caveat restricting the female from voting, meaning for a time in the province of New Jersey, the female could vote. Now, I'm not finding any personal commentary upon it, but something curious did happen. The female participants, suddenly enfranchised in government, did not view it as their prerogative, did not view it as something they ought do. Then, very quickly, that franchise was taken away. So I must wonder what that says in the notion of voting and participation. Now, if you analyze our federal Constitution, it does not begin with "we, the men of America." It does not begin with "we, the states of America," though there was some debate as to whether that should take place. But rather instead, "we, the people of the United States." The language placed in the Constitution speaks of no person or eligible persons. This language is purposeful because we hope this Constitution will last beyond the scope of our lifetime. Now, you ask me in every instance, should the woman hold some public capacity in the course of voting or even serving? I will say that is not my question to answer, but rather the people of the United States. For myself, I shall say simply this. The capacity of the female mind for studies of the highest order cannot be questioned. Every day they show evidence of genius, erudition, science, have proven in no way to be the inferior of man. Should you wish for further evidence of this, Miss Tanisha, you need only consult my wife. Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, sir. We have a question from Denise about the upcoming election. Are you comfortable speaking about an election in the future?
I'm a politician, sir. I'm comfortable speaking upon all things political.
Well, very good. Then this will sit squarely within your comfortability. Denise wants to know, can you share your thoughts on the upcoming election and, depending on its outcome and which candidate is selected, how that might affect our very young country?
Well, I thank you for the question. Let us examine the administration of Mr. Adams for an instance. Now, what have we witnessed over the course of Mr. Adams' administration? We have witnessed our party politics only continue to arise with more vitriol and bane. Moreover, we have witnessed those who are disloyal to Mr. Adams and his faction to face things like not only expulsion from their public offices, but, in some regards, jail time. We have seen the arise of the Alien and Sedition Acts, a monster which will forever disgrace its parents, whereby anybody who offers dissent of their government might find penalty, punitive, martial, or otherwise. We have witnessed a quasi-war with France, our first and our dearest of allies. We have seen, in every instance, a world that turns against this American experiment. We have seen Mr. Adams's faction turn against him just as simultaneously. And from that, we find ourselves once more upon a pivotal moment of questioning. Alas, Miss Denise, there was only one individual who could command the respect of all of America. I speak, of course, of His Excellency General Washington, the first president of these United States. And so inevitably it should be expected that a chief magistrate should always be met with dissent. Even His Excellency President Washington could not escape that in his second term. But from that, my sincere hope, knowing full well the world that we live in is without parallel, knowing that we have found once more a war between England and France, one for which America has found itself in a great wrestling match to determine its place. And so from that, my hope is a chief magistrate who should be fixed upon ideas of statecraft, who should, with their pen, hold equal prowess as another might do with a sword, so that America, without ever drawing its saber, might find some peaceful resolution to these ideas, these crucibles that every day challenge a people. Now, who that gentleman should be, I know not. I know full well I am grateful it is not myself. But from that I can think of several gentlemen whose esteem and whose confidence I would gladly place my heart to. My genuine hope is that we can find some measure whereby we can reunite this country, which has found itself so consistently divided.
Thank you, sir. I enjoy your discourse on the necessity of capacity for someone who sits in the executive, a cooler head, as they are, in some regard, leading not just a people, but an entire nation's military. Speaking of that specific office, Michael wants to know, what sword does Congress have to wield in their role in oversight of the executive branch?
Thank you for the question, Master Michael. Now, I will be quick in every instance to further say that the sword belongs to the executive, just as the purse belongs to Congress. When we were writing the Constitution in 1787, there was a great apprehension to unite Article 1 and Article 2 too closely. Now, I will say, when I put forward the plan that would eventually become the Virginia Plan, it was the initial hope that it would be Congress who would elect the president. That was changed in committee, primarily because there was a great fear the president would become the puppet of Congress. So from that, what tools does Congress have to check a president of the United States? Well, you will find several. First and foremost, it should be the Congress in every time who might file articles of impeachment, so that if a president should lack the confidence of a people, the House of Representatives might file them. Equally, from there, we have a Senate that must forward those selfsame articles of impeachment. Now, equally, I will remind you that under Article 2 of the Constitution, anything the president puts forward, be it treaty, be it appointment, be it any maneuver, must have the ratification or approval of the Senate. These are measures where not only the powers are separate, but the functions are separate simultaneously. It is my genuine hope that we should see the highest and most eloquent of statesmen fill that role which is bestowed upon a great deal of power, the likes of which have not been seen, but who simultaneously is so guarded and careful with that power that in every instance they should not overstep those authorities and become a Philip of Macedon or Julius Caesar. My genuine hope is that a role so coveted for its power should equally be watched over and guarded over by not only Article 1 in the form of the House of Representatives and Senate, but also the American people.
In what ways might the American people guard over such?
Well, it is difficult to say. The American people have no role in electing the chief magistrate or president of these United States. Instead, it is an electorate constituted by the various state laws and state provisions. Now, one method in which the executive is checked is our electoral college system, whereby the gentleman who receives the greatest number of votes becomes the president, and the gentleman who receives the second number of votes becomes the vice president. It forms the two gentlemen to be framed in interest opposition with one another. I have no expectation that should ever be amended, nor should any president ever wish to amend that. But also, we find in our electorate system that our electorates receive a two-number of votes. They have to vote for a gentleman not only within their state, but also a gentleman who resides outside of their state. In that, we check our own faction, our own interest, our own prejudices, ensure that we extend the sphere of our minds beyond what party we belong to, what faction we belong to ensure instead that the most honorable or most intelligent statesman receives that high place of office. As for another check the citizenry of the United States should have, it is the frequent discourse and acknowledgement of their congressmen. Make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, the most powerful branch of this system of government is not Article 2, but rather instead Article 1, your most direct lifeline to not only your democracy, but this republican system of government. Therefore, the duty belongs to every citizen to be in frequent conversation and correspondence with not only their congressmen, but equally the various senators. I will remind that at this present moment, the senators are elected by the state legislatures, but it does not make them, in any instance, less representatives to the people.
So you mentioned, sir, something around an electoral college, and we have a few questions surrounding that. Both Bill and Sean suggest that an electoral college is not such a great idea, and Sean even goes so far as to suggest that it might be abolished. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, Bill and Sean, I disagree wholeheartedly for several reasons. We have one of the largest geographic empires upon the globe. 13 separate provinces with greater potential to expand that. Now, from that, let us examine the presidency of the United States. The citizenry of the United States, climbing to a near 18 or 19 billion people, how shall the people of America find confidence in one individual, to know them so well that they should have the confidence of a people? Once more, there was only one man who held that much estimation, and George Washington will not live forever. So from that, the Electoral College becomes a great necessity so that men of government might, through careful deliberation, find an individual who is the most capable for the job. Now, secondly, I will say once more, the rights of suffrage are different within every state. Who qualifies as people differ in every state. So from that, our Electoral College becomes a more uniform method. Last of all, I will speak regarding the dangers of democracy. It might surprise you to know that at the Constitutional Convention there were a great many gentlemen who did not have confidence in democracy. If we examine the ancient confederations of Greece, the city-state of Athens, I have often said that if every citizen of Athens were a Socrates, it still would have ended in a mob. But in those various times, we witnessed great demagogues arise who spoke of safety, who spoke of power, who spoke of might. From that, a people become easily swayed in the novelty of new ideas. There is a great distrust that, despite the fact that people in every instance should become sovereign in government, what should check the various passions of a people from following a course detrimental to the spirit of government? Now, these are my points, my perspectives. Should a people one day decide for a system of government that is more democratic? Should a people, in every instance, one day decide that these various institutions should be contrary to those ideas? Well, from that gentleman, I will say it is one of the earliest tenets of our government that whenever a system of government becomes obstructive to its ends, well, it is the right of a people to alter or change it. I should hope within my lifetime that does not happen. But simultaneously, I am not one to endeavor to legislate from the tomb. The world, in every instance, belongs to the living. And so from that, I am hesitant to change our systems of government solely because we must guard over them. But the mechanisms exist by which they can be changed. But it should never be done in haste, never out of novelty, but rather instead out of the gradual improvements of mankind. I thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you, sir. I wonder, can we change tacks for a moment? You've been speaking on government theory and the ancient gifts of Rome and Greece for so long. Could we change to something more personal?
I wish we would, yes.
Someone suggests, a dean suggests that you have a good friend named Mr. Jefferson, and he wants to know what mutual interests you might have that brings you so close together.
Well, I'm pleased to bring forward this question. Mr. Jefferson and I first met within this city of Williamsburg in 1776, although that is not where our friendship was kindled. Now, it would not be until 1779, where I sat as his counselor, he being the governor of Virginia. Now, the first thing that formed an unsinkable friendship between he and I, surprisingly, was not the company of us spending time together, but rather instead what has often been called a republic of letters. If you see, the following year, in 1780, I left Williamsburg to attend the General Congress. Mr. Jefferson continued as the Chief Magistrate of Virginia, but through that our friendship was forged in our letters, whereby we could speak for our hopes, our aspirations, our dreams, a friendship which survived through continents. Mr. Jefferson eventually going on to serve as Minister Plenipotentiary to France. Mr. Jefferson became one of my greatest resources, my eyes and ears to a world that I would never see, being fairly uncomfortable with sea travel. Mr. Jefferson sent me not only novelties from France, new innovations and inventions, but also books I could not receive upon this continent of North America. In that respect, I have often proffered that Mr. Jefferson is just as responsible for our eventual Constitution as I am. Because without those books, without the study of ancient governments, well, I could not be as informed as I was during that eventual convention. Now, I will also say that Mr. Jefferson was a great proponent, responsible in convincing me of the necessity of a federal Bill of Rights. But upon a personal level, and I shall say Thomas Jefferson is a dreamer. In every instance, Mr. Jefferson endeavors to craft the system of government for the way the world ought be in his mind. For myself, I have ever endeavored to legislate the world as I see it, as it is. In that we become an amiable partnership. It's said of himself and I that no two brothers are as close. We are united in our love of books, our love of chess, our love of, wine, sometimes to excess, and equally to card games. Games like whist, loo, pitchers, of which I often win.
Do you think that might never be recorded in memorandum books that you won against Mr. Jefferson at pitchers again?
Mr. Jefferson endeavors to write for posterity. I do not entertain the idea that he likes admitting losing to anything, but if I have anything to say about it, I will be sure to record it.
I'm fairly certain, if I recall reading his handwriting, that he said lost to James Madison at pitchers, frowny face.
I'm pleased to see he admitted it, but was this a sketch he wrote of his own frowny face?
It was a delightful sketch, just 2 dots and a line.
I'm very curious.
Sir, we have several questions and not much time. Would you mind being somewhat brief with your answers, and we can get through as many of these as we can?
You know me, sir. I have ever been associated with brevity.
And truth, apparently. Lindsay would like to know, is it true that you once lost a bid for election to the state's House of Delegates for not handing out free alcohol?
Yes.
Brevity, there it is, and I find myself a liar now. I apologize. Bill would like to know, should a president ever be impeached for lying to the people about a critical threat to their safety?
Yes.
Very good. Chase would like to know, with all of you can be a bit more brief if you wish. It's entirely up.
I know not how to be briefer than one.
I'm sorry,
answers.
a bit more verbose, if you.
Oh,
choose.
I see. Very good.
Chase wants to know, with all the troubles that have now ended in France, do you think they can learn from America?
Yes.
I'm loving you this afternoon, sir. Brenda would like to know, can you tell us about your manservant Jennings?
No. Yes, I can. And upon that note, I will be somewhat more expansive. Mr. Jennings, at this present moment, is a young boy, in truth. At this present moment, I believe no older than 6 or 7. His mother was enslaved to our household. His father, some speculate, was an American Indian, although that cannot be fully afforded. As to Mr. Jennings, he is a bright boy, an intelligent boy. I will say I've chosen to be without a manservant for some time, and being retired from domestic life, there is less necessity for that. But from that, I've already discussed with my wife that should I eventually be called to a federal office, be it hypothetically, Mr. Smith, eventually a member of the next president's cabinet, hypothetically, or even hypothetically president of these United States, that Mr. Jennings should accompany me. And were I given any confidence of the future, I would say that he would be. And given his courage, I am confident that no matter what crucible America should endure, be it a continued conflict with France or a hypothetical, let us not entertain too much, another war with Great Britain, that Mr. Jennings should become a great asset. God forbid we ever find a day where we find ourselves invaded. God forbid we ever find a day that the presidential mansion, which is still not completed, should be assaulted by the British and burned down. I have no doubt that this young boy, Mr. Jennings, after he has grown for some time, should become entirely responsible in the execution of rescuing various antiquities, treasures of these, strange years that America has taken part in. Now, I think the greatest asset of Mr. Jennings is his eloquence with the pen. I think if Mr. Jennings continues to apply himself, that it should be because of this peculiar and brilliant boy, that various things should be known about me. Mr. Smith, I will tell you, I am a fairly private person. I do not speak of myself. And yet, I have watched every day this curious boy with his brilliant, vibrant eyes observe everything that I've done. Write down, already at his young age, various practices that I often find myself unconscious of. I think it is this legacy that if, hypothetically, Mr. Jennings continues to apply himself with, that should leave a lasting legacy to inform posterity who I was, how I was, and in every instance, how over the course of my life these stories are told. But I think that is a question for tomorrow, as at this present moment, Mr. Jennings, in the year of 1799, is still quite young.
We thank you, sir, for your continued civil debate in this conversation. Debate is, of course, healthy, but bringing the word civil back into debate is perhaps the most healthy. We have just 2 more questions, this and the final. Elizabeth would like to know how you began your political career.
Very good question, Miss Elizabeth. I thank you. How fitting that we should have the namesake of Virginia itself ask one of the final questions. I entered politics almost by accident. When I left the College of New Jersey, I speculated going into the clergy. I speculated entering into the law, but I knew for certain I did not wish to dabble in politics. But in truth, it was a social cause that compelled me first to enter political service. Now, where I come from, Orange County, Virginia, was a place that pervaded religious persecution and prejudice. Various Protestant denominations found themselves in close jail, and I found myself entirely undone by the hell-conceived idea of intolerance. I wished that my native Virginia would embody the free air of other provinces. So rather than railing about it or becoming, in any instance, complacent, in 1776, when an election took place to choose members of a new Virginia convention, the likes of which had not been seen, I was eager to find appointment in that. I replaced a relation of mine, Thomas Barber, who enlisted in the Army, and I became one of the youngest delegates to the 5th Virginia Convention. The body that met in the old Capitol building at Williamsburg, Virginia, who resolved for Virginia's independence and then created a new system of government. And I will say the earliest accomplishment that I held was ensuring that in 1776 the first caveat and clause regarding religious freedom was put forward. That was, I think, one of my sole accomplishments, to ensure that rather than hold true to the toleration which had so often pervaded our history, that instead in 1776 Virginia would have the free exercise of religion according to the dictates of conscience. Now, as a previous questioner set forward, I lost the election of 1777 because I refused to bribe my constituents with whiskey, rum, and punch. And yet I was appointed in 1778 to serve as a counselor and advisor to Patrick Henry. That was the beginning of my political career, and I've continued through it. And I should leave with this, that in 1788, well, once more I stood against that same gentleman who I lost to in 1787, and from that won the election without needing to bribe my constituents. Never let it be said, ladies and gentlemen, that America cannot improve.
Thank you, sir. And our final question is about the perfecting of our union and our people. What do you envision the American people becoming?
I thank you for the question. It is my sanguine hope that the people of America might be children of one flourishing empire, that they can be a people who might over time incorporate themselves, united not by one common idea, one common blood, one common heritage, but rather common principles that are universal, that are self-evident, that are sacred and undeniable. My genuine hope is that the people of the United States should be enlightened, that they should consider themselves the owners of these various principles, that these systems of government belong to them, not to the initial crafters of them, but instead for themselves to forward and perpetuate. It should be remembered, finally, that the rights for which America ought contend are the rights of human nature. By the blessing of the author of these rights on the means exerted for their defense, it is my genuine hope that the people of America may always find a way to prevail against opposition. Friends, I will tell you, if men were angels, no system of government would be necessary. Man will always be imperfect. Man will always be flawed. There will always be places where man is blind to. And therefore, it is my hope that the people of America might, in surrounding themselves together in these ideas of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, see every perspective through discourse with their fellow man. I thank you for this time to reflect as a private citizen. I wish you in every instance the greatest happiness in your own private affairs, and in every instance progress in our public affairs. Until we meet again, I remain your humble servant, James Madison. Good day. This presentation is brought to you by the generous contributions of our Colonial Williamsburg donors.